Hello, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have full review of the Motorola Moto G85. Let's get started. This device is part of Motorola's mid-range because it's in the G series, although it's the highest that's in the G series. So it basically competes with the lower end of the Edge series. And remember that the Edge series already integrates some slightly more premium features. So personally, I find Motorola's strategy of launching devices at a very similar price but with several differences and improvements a bit strange. This model has been launched in Mexico at a price of 5,999 pesos. That's more or less $295. Although remember that the prices here are not the same as over there. The attraction is that they include some Moto Buds as a gift in the box. That definitely catches the eye. However, there is also an edition with 512 gigabytes of storage, which is the version that is the same price as the Motorola Edge 50 Fusion. We are talking about 6,999 pesos, which is more or less $345, although I tell you the prices here are not the same as over there. So the only factor where the Moto G80 Sake would beat the Edge 50 Fusion would be in the storage with the 512 gigabytes edition, but if in that model they are at the same price, the truth to me would call my attention more to its brother of the Edge series. So Motorola currently has a somewhat saturated catalog where there is very little difference in price, so it can become a little complicated to choose. But let's describe this device point by point for you to tell me if it is what you are looking for or not. In the price range in which it competes, there are also many other devices as alternatives. In some cases, they might attract more or less attention, but one thing that makes Motorola stand out is its good distribution. So you can not only find it in the official Motorola store but also in other distributors such as Amazon, Liverpool, or also Palacio de Hierro. So I think this is good news because the more distributors have it, the more chances you have to find it with a promotion or special offer. The front design can really stand out because of the incorporation of the curved screen, so that's a very prominent element in this price range where we generally see simpler designs. In fact, the side bezels will also be very reduced, although the top and bottom bezels are a little bit thicker, but it definitely looks like a much more expensive device. Here at the front, it integrates Gorilla Glass, although Motorola does not specify which version of Gorilla Glass is integrated into this model. Some claim that it is Gorilla Glass 5, but we could not be totally sure of that data. This device bets on a very thin design with 7 points 59 millimeters thick. On the right side, we find power button and volume buttons. At the top is a microphone and Dolby Atmos text. On the left side, there are absolutely no buttons or anything like that. While at the bottom is the tray, where we can place a SIM card and also a microSD card, something positive in the price range. In addition to another microphone, the USB-C port, a regulatory indicator that I do not know why they placed in the frame, and finally the speaker with a design of 2 wide perforations. The back cover on this edition I have in my hands in charcoal gray color is plastic, let's say plain. But there are other editions in lime green and electric blue that integrate synthetic leather, like many other Motorola devices. Personally, I prefer more the editions with synthetic leather to look even more original. However, it is a design that stands out for a bit of minimalism and above all a lot of lightness and very thin, so it is comfortable in the hand. In this edition, the camera rings come in copper color more or less, but its level of resistance against water only is IP52. That is, it can withstand splashes, but it can't withstand being submerged. The screen has a diagonal of 6.67 inches. This is a usual size, but since it has such small bezels, the device is not perceived as large or cumbersome. The resolution of this screen is Full HD+. In conjunction with the size, it achieves a pixel density of 394 pixels per inch, good enough that it's not that easy to make out pixels even on small or very thin typefaces. This screen is OLED, so it is going to offer us intense colors, very high contrast. It also has good viewing angles. The maximum peak brightness is 1600 nits, so you can see the content in a good way outdoors under the sunlight. In this case, it doesn't support HDR content, so it's an overall brightness and confirms to us that we're looking at a good display. For the range, I think it is a screen that competes really very well. In fact, we're also going to find that it's a screen with 120 Hz in its refresh rate, so the movements will feel quite fluid as well. And with respect to the minimum brightness, I think it's comfortable enough, and there's also a built-in extra dimming option so that at night you can turn it on, and it's an even more comfortable viewing. So it's a good screen wherever you want to see it. Only the fact that it is a curved screen might scare some people about its resistance. This display integrates 3 color calibration modes, in case you want colors a little less saturated, with an intermediate or as saturated as possible, and they also have the fully manual temperature adjustment. In sound, we are also going to find a device that stands out because it incorporates stereo sound. So we find 2 speakers. The second speaker is located in the earpiece area for calls, and in fact, it does not have so much presence of bass frequencies. It is a fairly simple speaker, but in the price range, it is interesting that it is integrated in stereo sound, as many competitors stay with mono sound in this category. Fortunately, the main speaker on the bottom does have a sufficiently high bass frequency presence, so I don't think the sound is going to disappoint or anything like that. The volume is not exaggeratedly loud, but considering how thin the device is, I think it delivers well. Let's listen to a little test, but remember that it's not the same as listening to it live. And like most Motorola devices, in this case it integrates good software to complement the experience in conjunction with Dolby Atmos. So you're going to find different surround sound presets. You even have a spatial audio feature, another smart audio feature that will automatically adapt everything and some profiles. But what I like most is that you also have access to a 10-band equalizer that you can customize without the need to have headphones connected, so that the sound experience is very specific to your taste. However, one absence that could come to weigh is that it doesn't have a headphone jack. In the price range, you can still find some devices with this feature, so you have to consider it. Fortunately, it is going to integrate a good variety of wireless sound card. So if you prefer to use Bluetooth headphones, fortunately it has LHDC version 3 and version 4, aptX, aptX adaptive, and LDAC. So you have the full catalog. Any pair of headphones you buy with wireless high-resolution sound is going to be compatible with this cell phone. On this device, we're going to find 2 microphones. Let's do the test.
Este es un audio grabado con los micrófonos integrados del Motorola Moto G85 5G.
The noise cancellation algorithm is really very bad. I'm not in a noisy environment, and my voice sounds like I'm in a very noisy environment that they aggressively reduce the noise to. So I think this is one aspect where Motorola needs to urgently improve on all of their devices. This is not the only Motorola with this drawback. Now let's listen to the behavior of these microphones in a noisier environment.
I can see that you don't realize, and that's what made me fall in love. 'Cause you got the way you play makes my heart beat down. It's amazing all the time. You are the only thing I need in life. Oh, I want you. Can't you see? I want you. I believe 'cause I want you. Here with me, I'm going crazy. I'm going crazy.
Again, it is noticeable that these are microphones that do not perform well with their gain setting and noise reduction. It should be something that as a user we could turn on or off, but the device does it automatically and does it very poorly. Finally, in this block, the vibration motor is a bit strange because at times it seems to give the sensation of being a motor on the Z-axis. At other times, the interactor in the system feels like an X-axis motor. So I could tell you that in the price range it gives a sufficiently high good quality feel, but Motorola does not officially communicate the characteristic of that vibration motor. The front camera of this device is 32 megapixels with f-aperture of 2.4 and fixed focus, a configuration that Motorola uses in several models. Remember that you have the same quick access gesture to the camera that we find in most Motorola devices. If you repeat this gesture, you can also rotate between both cameras. Note that it has 2 different levels of amplitude, and at the top, we will find a selector for you to choose the type of color you want to capture the camera. In the lower right corner is the beauty mode control, which has different parameters, each with its own intensity selector. And we also find a list of effects that we can apply and preview in real time. Notice that the response speed is not that high, so it feels a bit clumsy when taking a lot of pictures. And in the settings, we find different capture modes. For example, it can be with a gesture on the palm of the hand, also by smile detection, or touching any area of the camera to be able to make this capture. So it can be convenient when the shutter is a bit awkward to reach. This front camera seems to me to be of good quality in terms of the level of detail. Textures are well distinguished. It even has good color rendering in this outdoor photo, so the experience is positive. It has fixed focus, but even if you have your arm outstretched, we are still going to find good sharpness in the face. Indoors though, the level of detail is no longer as high, so you do require very good lighting to get well-detailed shots. In backlit scenes, notice that the preview doesn't look well optimized, but after processing, I think it does make a good balance of highlights and shadows, although the color is a bit paler than I'd like and loses a bit of accuracy in these backlit scenarios. At night, if you have a nearby light source, the result seems positive to me, still maintaining a good level of detail and above all controlling noise well in the darker areas. In backlit night scenes, it will use the screen to try to illuminate your face a little better, although the color is a little unbalanced as the screen has a slightly cooler tonality. You could also turn off the screen lighting and the result is still considerably good, and I find it to be a good exponent of selfies in these conditions. In fact, indoors was where the result was not so appealing, but you could use the night mode to try to improve it. For portrait photography with the front camera, we confirm that this device is not able to detect objects, although it is more or less the expected behavior in this range. On the back, we will find ultra-wide angle camera of 16mm with 8 megapixels in its sensor, f2.2 aperture and autofocus. Not a bad camera, but the Edge 50 Fusion has a little more resolution. Then we find the 24mm camera with a 50 megapixel sensor. In fact, it is a Sony Lithia 600 in theory, a modern sensor, although not that sophisticated. The lens has f-aperture 1.7, autofocus, and yes, we find optical stabilization. Another way to quickly open the camera is to press the on-off button twice. Notice that again we will see a bit of a clumsy response when trying to capture many photos in a row. It seems that the device is not capable of doing this task. In fact, if we hold down the shutter we can initiate a burst, but it is a bit of a slow burst. In our test trying to capture number 3, we notice that it takes almost a quarter of a second before the device reacts. Burst takes more than half a second to start, and as you saw there is a lot of space between one photo and another, so it would be a bit difficult to capture the exact moment. Or if you tap on the screen, you can adjust the exposure or focus, but for more parameters, you can access the Pro mode where you can set the focus, also the white balance, the shutter speed that can reach up to 32 seconds, the ISO that can reach up to 3200, and the exposure compensation. A positive thing is that this cell phone does allow the capture of photographs in RAW or also combined with JPG. And to finish with the camera experience, fortunately, QR code scanner is integrated from the main interface, and another excellent news is that it also keeps the scanner with Adobe, although you must manually access this mode as it does not have automatic detection. But once you are inside this mode, notice how it immediately detects the edges. You do not even need to touch to start scanning. It makes an optimization of colors. You can even apply cleaning tools, filters and other things and go adding more pages to export it as a PDF file. So it's a completely premium scanner and very good for this price range. This device has support for a high resolution mode where you can have 50 megapixel photographs, and it seems to me that it does get to take advantage of this level of detail. Perhaps the photo processing is not the most optimal, as there will be some areas that curiously appear very out of focus, but the center area appears with a good focus, even the area at the top. So the behavior is strange. They could correct it with some update possibly, but if you don't use the high resolution mode, note that this is what the outdoor pictures would look like, in this case with the ultra wide camera. It seems to me that the colors are slightly more saturated, especially in the sky, but the overall result is positive. There is a bit of chromatic aberration present, especially at the edge of the picture, but it's not really serious. Considering its price, I think it has a good enough quality lens. The main camera, of course, is of higher quality and doesn't have as much distortion or chromatic aberration in the edges. It also has a good color rendition. Overall, I think it is a camera that performs well in these outdoor scenarios. Indoors, the ultra-wide camera may come to suffer a little bit more than it should because there is not as much light present, so a little more noise and graininess will appear, and the colors and level of detail will not be as good. But notice that the main camera does a better job in these types of scenarios, gathering a very good amount of light, and with this it can have good detail, even good noise control, still keeping the textures well. In backlit scenarios, notice how the preview is not optimized. The result with the ultra-wide camera is positive in terms of light and shadow balance. As you can see, the areas that were completely burned out now appear well exposed, although the purple chromatic aberration that this lens can generate is revealed a bit more, which is not of such high quality, but in the price range is understandable. The main camera curiously had a lower performance. The shadow area is darker than it should be, so it does not seem to be so spectacular in this aspect, the camera of this device. Possibly it did not get to detect my face very well, as it notes that applying zoom 2x we are going to find a good quality of photography actually. At night, the ultra-wide camera I think shows a little more weaknesses, having a little more complications. There is more noise present and not as much detail, but for the price I think the result is positive, although it doesn't let you use this camera in night mode. Now you're looking at a photograph with the main camera in this same night setting. It seems to me that it manages to control the exposure in a good way, but it is still not such an attractive photograph. In fact, in this case we're also going to see some out of focus areas, possibly due to the long exposure it has to perform. However, if you use the night mode, notice how it greatly improves the exposure of the most illuminated areas. In fact, detail is also elevated, although you still notice some areas with significant blur. So I think the camera doesn't seem to be that outstanding in this model. In motion scenarios, the ultra-wide camera can give some slightly odd results. Notice that for some reason a yellow spot comes out on my hand and the ball is a bit deformed. It is somewhat normal to see this kind of behavior in motion environments in devices of this price. The main camera performs better compared to what we were seeing on the ultra-wide camera, although the higher exposure areas anyway have a bit of an odd result, but at least the result is a bit better. Now let's look at the full zoom range it is capable of. This is the ultra-wide camera. Next, you're looking at the main camera, where we're still seeing good detail. And we start now to see the 2x digital zoom, where we immediately realize that it is digital zoom. That is, it doesn't apply any cropping to the sensor. So despite being a state-of-the-art Sony Lithia sensor, you don't really see anything that advanced yet on this sensor in terms of zoom. Here you're looking at the 5x digital zoom, where it definitely looks a little bit forced. The sharpness looks very exaggerated, so it's not nice, and the maximum you get is 10x, but it's definitely not recommended to use this setting because the result looks ugly. For macro photography, you can apply some zoom with the main camera and see the result we have. I find it to be of good quality and with good detail. Although you could also use the ultra-wide camera as a macro camera, and either way you can also keep a high level of detail. Remember that you can also take panoramic pictures. In this case, they have a good resolution, although you can only capture them with the main camera. It would be ideal if it would also let us take panoramic pictures using the ultra-wide camera. And for portrait photography, again, you can tell it's not that advanced in photography. Note that in this case I am backlit, so it does not expose well the most illuminated areas. The detection seems to me to be acceptable, but not that attractive. There are some areas that I didn't keep in focus and objects that I didn't keep in focus either. In another slightly easier setting it did give a better result, but it's still not as advanced a portrait. The bokeh effect generated in the background is nice, but I wouldn't consider it an expert at portraiture. However, for the price it is acceptable. Finally, look at what the result would be like with night portraits. It seems to me that the work he does is good enough. Even the lens area he managed to keep it in focus, so it's not bad. In video recording, I could not say that it disappoints for its price, but the Motorola Edge 50 Fusion can record in 4K, while this model is left with only Full HD recording. In fact, it can't even record in Full HD at 60 frames per second. So you realize that it comes very limited in this aspect. When you start recording video, note that you can pause and resume your recording. You could also take pictures while you are doing this action. and even turn on the flashlight without cutting your video recording. This behavior is good, but one negative is that it doesn't allow you to switch between the ultra-wide camera and the main camera, even in this basic resolution which is full HD. So the video recording didn't really suit me. For the price range, we couldn't demand it to record in 4K. However, considering that the Motorola Edge 50 Fusion does record in 4K, I would consider that a better option. Video quality isn't bad, but being limited to full HD, we won't find that much quality. One odd thing you'll notice is that the ultra-wide camera records with even more saturated colors, so it doesn't seem to maintain a consistency between one camera and the other. In addition, it does not let us make the dynamic switching between the two lenses, which further limits its performance. In addition, the video is perceived to go at a low rate of bits per second, which causes that in very fast movements can get to generate a pixelated effect. Indoors, you will notice that the ultra-wide camera really suffers a lot to collect light. There is a lot of noise present and little detail. The main camera improves a lot in this video recording quality. It controls noise better, there is better detail and better color. In backlit conditions, note that the ultra-wide camera seems to have a good balance of highlights and shadows. It doesn't seem to give priority to lighting the face, so you see that you don't get to overexpose the most lit area. So in that sense, I like the result, unlike the behavior of other devices. However, it still doesn't look too high quality. The main camera has a very similar behavior. The image looks a bit darker than it should. Although in this case, you do get to notice some jumps in exposure at times when it detects or fails to detect the face. However, it does make a good effort to balance the highlights and shadows. It's just that the exposure jumps can be a bit more pronounced than I'd like, and at night the ultra-wide camera is going to suffer too much. It's not going to be advisable to shoot with this camera because it has very little light input. Therefore, it generates a lot more noise and graininess, and also you don't see any well-defined objects. The main camera seems to perform better. Even in darker areas, you get to distinguish a bit more of the content. So areas that receive direct illumination are going to come out better. Although not an expert, obviously we are talking about a mid-range device, but I think the main camera manages to hold up well. Only the white balance also presents some aggressive jumps in its changes. In this case, the device integrates digital stabilization, which looks good with the ultra-wide camera when you are walking. When you're running, maybe a little bit of blurring is generated by the action, so it's not intended for that much action. With the main camera, it's going to be similar. When you're walking, the motion compensation is very good. When you're running, I think it does a good job as well, but it's not such an action camera. The device also integrates a fast camera mode, although by default it has the stabilization turned off. Its speed is from 4x, which can be useful for recording people, and you can turn it up to 32x no more. So it is definitely not possible to record such spectacular landscapes unless the movements are fast per se. So the result I shot came out nice because it was a windy day, but otherwise it would have come out a bit ugly. It also integrates slow motion, although it's simple. In HD at 120 frames per second, so it doesn't look as spectacular as it should, although it doesn't look as spectacular, but in the price range we could say it's still expected. Note that the focus of the video recording seems positive to me. In fast movements, the focus will react with good speed. In more subtle movements, perhaps it is when it gets a little lost and the moment of refocusing is much more noticeable, but at least it doesn't get too confused. And remember that Motorola also offers a recording mode to preserve only one color. For example, here we are seeing that only part of the green color is preserved, so you could have creative effects as well. The front camera definitely doesn't have a very good video recording quality, especially for the work it does in backlit scenes. If you record outdoors, it's important that you don't have any shadows on your face, or else the background is going to come out very burnt. The level of detail is positive, but you're definitely going to notice a lot of overexposed areas in your video footage if you're not in optimal lighting conditions. Indoors, note that there will be a lot of noise present, although fortunately it doesn't sacrifice that much detail to eliminate that noise, but the result is definitely not attractive, and at night it will be exactly the same. There is a lot of noise present, although it tries to keep the level of detail well. However, I think it's not a good performer for front-facing video recording, so if you're really into recording vlogs or something like that, this would not be the recommended choice. Also, it doesn't integrate such advanced stabilization either, so when you're walking, if you're very careful, maybe you could have a good result, but if you're running, you're definitely going to notice that movement a lot. The device also integrates a fast camera mode for the front camera, which interestingly enough does apply stabilization, so that could come in handy, although the framing is very tight due to the stabilization. And as for additional modes, note that it does integrate dual recording mode, so you can show both the rear camera and the front camera. In this case, you can rotate the views to alternate which camera is the protagonist, and it does let you move this floating box to the position you want on the screen. If you are in the ultra-wide camera, it also lets you do very little zoom, but at least the zoom is not completely blocked. It also lets you record in split screen mode, so that both scenes are in the same size, and it still has this same behavior of applying a little zoom, although quite limited. Although note that if you use the main camera, you have a longer range zoom. It still doesn't look very spectacular though, but the dual recording mode does appreciate that it's built into this device, because in this price range it's not that common. Software, we will find Android 14 with the small Motorola customization layer, Hello UI. In this case, it offers us 2 years of software updates with 4 years of security patches. That is, it has 1 year less than the Motorola Edge 50 Fusion. That's why I insist that it would be a better alternative to go for that edition. Still, for this price range, it doesn't have a bad update policy. In fact, it is something positive, although not the best in the industry. We will find a customization center where you can change some things. Remember that Motorola has its own typography that gives this distinctive look to the aesthetics of this system. You can also select the full color palette of the system and change the shape of the icons on the main screen. We will also find an option called Edge Light that will make that when you place your device face down, the edge of the screen can emit a certain color when you receive a notification or a call to alert you that there is an important item to consider. Note that the lock screen also has some level of customization with which you can add another style of clock or even also some small widgets indicating some of the content, so you have a sufficient number of options, although it is not an extreme customization. Also, the widgets are only the ones that exist from the system, and you cannot add widgets from other app developers. You can also choose the style in which you want notifications to appear, and finally the shortcuts that appear in the corners. Remember that in this generation, Motorola offers 2 ways to display the quick settings panel. The traditional one is the one you are seeing, and a little more modern that, as you will notice, will show us directly to slide from the right corner down the system controls. In this case, they come out without any text, so it gives a very clean aesthetic, although it might be difficult for some users to know specifically what each button is for. You can then edit to show the text and thus make it a little easier to know how all these tools work. There is also the player and the brightness and volume control vertically, so you as a user choose how you want your device to behave. However, in this case, we will not find the always on display feature, so there is no way to continue to see the clock or some content. But if you give 2 taps, you can take a quick look at the information you have set on the lock screen. Also note that when you get a notification, the screen lights up, but it doesn't have the interactive display feature that on other Motorola's allows you to press and hold on the notification to see a little more information. So the behavior is a bit more traditional. Obviously, to interact with notifications, you must unlock. And this device also has a little sidebar that you can display. And here you can open apps in a floating window format. In this case, it supports up to 5 apps open in this mode. So you have a lot of versatility to be able to open and interact with multiple apps at the same time. You could also minimize them in a small bubble that remains floating on the screen so you can resume them at the time you want. So it has a good level of multitasking. Although it is necessary to make a clarification that in this case, it does not allow you to use the floating windows at the same time as the split screen. That would be a limitation. But the advantage is that this split screen section works with virtually any application, including Instagram and YouTube, which on other devices do not work under this floating format. Of course, the traditional Motorola gestures to open the camera or to turn on the flashlight are also present. That's something its users enjoy the most. It also includes a gesture to activate the split screen by swiping quickly, although it is turned off by default. And it also has the gesture to take a screenshot by leaving 3 fingers on the screen. But sometimes you might be interacting with the same content, so I don't consider it that useful. And it also integrates the new quick launch gesture for any app by double tapping the back of the cell phone. Although the process of using it can become a bit complex the first few times, but it's just a matter of getting used to it. And you can select several actions or a specific application to open, but I insist the first few times you are using it or testing it, it can be a bit complex to activate it. You just have to learn in which specific area it is necessary to give those touches for it to react. All the added functions are compiled in the Moto application, where you can take a detailed look at the explanation of each of these tools and some others that I will mention in other sections. But finally, in this block note that also has Moto Unplugged, that allows you to somehow disconnect from the digital life and take some time to avoid being interrupted by notifications or calls and have access only to the basics. Obviously, you can designate which applications you can use and which applications you cannot. In addition, you can independently set a time limit. You can end this at any time you want by checking for your fingerprint. Regarding artificial intelligence functions, it is a device that does not have so many features. Unlike the Edge series that integrates tools to create wallpapers and the like, in this case we will only have access to Google Gemini, as is the case with other Android devices, which is a voice assistant that you can ask various things and chat with him. But I insist it is a tool that all Android devices also integrate, perhaps the only artificial intelligence feature it has. It is this performance. It will learn how you use the applications so that some you keep them in cache and you can open them faster the next time you want to run them. With regard to security, note that integrates optical fingerprint reader inside the screen. In this case, it does allow you to change the unlock animation. When you are recognizing between 3 different options, this reader supports a maximum of 5 records, so you have good versatility there. You'll also notice that it integrates facial recognition, but it's only 2-dimensional, so it's not that secure, and so we won't pay much attention to it. It also integrates Google Extended Unlock, which is going to allow us to stay unlocked in some secure environments. And by the way, the password manager is also from Google, so you can fill out forms automatically. Although in this case, it does not verify by fingerprint before filling it. Although you can enable it in the settings, it also has an automatic lock function, which will detect when you leave your trusted places so that the device is locked again. And through the Moto Secure application, we can see some other tools that integrates this device, as the Secure folder, in which you can store both applications and files all privately and protected with a pattern, which can be different from your lock screen. So even though it has no application lock, the Secure folder does support apps and can help. If you use a PIN to unlock your cell phone, you could also shuffle the numbers before unlocking to avoid that some gossipy person learns your code, and you have some other tools to protect you when you surf the internet. So it could detect and alert you when someone is trying to trick you to steal your password. It's also going to alert you if you're connected to public networks, Wi-Fi, or with low security. And you can even select some applications that definitely won't be able to connect to the internet when you are on unsecured networks. In this case, it has the ThinkShield technology from Motorola and Lenovo to avoid being a victim of a cyber attack and have a higher degree of protection. Although curiously, in this model, unlike other models of Motorola, it does not integrate a scan against malware, also from ThinkShield. But in that aspect, you only depend on Google Play Protect, that we all already know that it is not so safe. What it will do through the Moto Secure app will simply be to give you some suggestions to enable or disable in your settings and be a little more protected. It also integrates the family space section. That is going to help us manage all the devices in our family if all use Motorola. In fact, you could also create different profiles. And as you realize, even analyze the location of your entire family to always have that peace of mind, also on this same device. You can create spaces for different people. For example, if you are going to lend your cell phone to a child or a minor, you can select which applications will be able to use and even for how long they will have access. So you can create several spaces and then start them individually. The only drawback is that you have to activate some permissions before you can use it for the first time. And it might be a bit complex for users who are not so advanced. But after this, you can use these profiles very nicely and set the time limits for each session. Obviously, children will not be able to leave this mode until you indicate it, so it's a safe environment to use. And if you happen to lose your cell phone, it relies on the Google network to try to find it, since Motorola does not have its own implementation. The battery of this device, it has a capacity of 4,310 mAh. That's a pretty short battery in this sense, definitely, that we find one of its weakest points. They give priority to a slim design, but they sacrifice too much of the battery. Consider also that the Motorola Edge 50 Fusion, it has a larger battery without necessarily being a very thick device, although I must say that in my testing it didn't do too bad. It seems that the processor has good efficiency in its consumption, since in my close-up drain test, it was close to reaching 4 hours. So let's say it gave me more or less about 20 minutes less than what they give on average devices with 5 milliamp battery. So I think it's well managed power. But if you notice that it is a small battery In my test of draining in the background, I noticed that it did increase the battery life, so we conclude that the device, if it is able to manage well the applications that are running in the background, so maybe you don't have to worry so much about keeping things closed that you are not using so that you have a good battery life. In addition, the saving mode could help as well, and we also found a maximum saving mode, which is going to restrict you more things, although it doesn't completely change the interface, but it does block access to several applications, so that in times of emergency, you can have a more extreme savings. In this case, the charger included in the box. It is 33 watts, although the device supports 30-watt charging, although that in theory, because in practice we realized that the maximum it reached was 25.5 watts. More or less, the first 15 minutes of charging. In fact, in 15 minutes, it got up to 32% battery. In 30 minutes, it got up to 57%, showing that it is a remarkably good charge. The full charge was completed in 1 hour and 20 minutes, since after about 45 minutes, it starts to drop the charging power. And considering that it is a relatively small battery, I think it is not so spectacular charging from 0 to 100. Consider that the Motorola Edge 50 Fusion, it has a bigger battery with more charging power and it charges faster. And as additional details, obviously that we won't find wireless charging nor reverse wireless charging if it has smart charging to learn your usage pattern and charge a little slower if you leave it plugged in overnight, but it doesn't come with a charging lock unless you need to keep your phone plugged in for 3 days. And in those scenarios, it will protect the overcharge, but it is something unusual. While in connectivity, if we will find support for networks, although there is no tool that allows us block internet access to certain applications through our mobile data. So you have to be very careful with the consumption of our data. Something curious is that it does support eSIM. In this price range is something very unusual. If you do not know what the eSIM is for, it would allow you to contract some mobile service without the need to purchase a physical SIM card. So you just need to sign up for a service and they send you a QR code that you scan. And with that, you already have a connection. That's why it's very useful for when you're traveling. And since this cell phone supports eSIM, let me tell you about IRLO, which is a service that offers you an eSIM. In case you are going to travel, it can be very convenient. All you have to do is sign up for it before you travel and you will receive a QR code to your email. Or also from the same IRLO application, you can have this QR code available. I'll tell you what you're going to install later on your cell phone with eSIM. Just make sure you do not activate the eSIM before you're already on the road. You just install it and leave it ready so that once you are in the country you want to travel, activate this eSIM and that's it. You will be able to enjoy the service as you have contracted it. For example, let's say you want to go to Europe. Notice that you are offered different plans. At the time of recording this video, they would offer you a gigabyte for 7 days at $5. Obviously, there are also 30-day plans with higher capacities or even longer duration of time. It's all going to depend on you as a user. So in the description, I leave you the link so you can go and purchase your eSIM with IRLO. I personally already tried it when I went to Berlin and it worked perfectly fine. This is one of the advantages of having a device with eSIM. I insist that in this price range, it is something really very unusual to see the support for eSIM, and so we can highlight it as a very strong point of this model. However, you know that the Fusion Edge, it also has eSIM. With respect to Wi-Fi, it has version 5. It's what we expected in the range. Bluetooth is perceived a little bit old because it has version 5.1, so maybe it won't have as much stability or as much range as the newer versions. It does have NFC. So you can set up your card to make payments by bringing your cell phone close to the banking terminals, but it doesn't have FM radio. It is also capable of projecting your screen wirelessly, both in mirrored format as well as through Smart Connect. This, I think, may be one of the additions most interesting of this device in the price range, because most devices in the segment will only be able to do mirror projection. However, this model can also project in a desktop-like format to open applications in windowed mode, or also filter applications to project only those with multimedia content, and that you can use it as a kind of player. So it's very positive experience of your screen projection. We will also find Android Auto. And with respect to the sensors, it doesn't lack anything because it does have accelerometer, geomagnetic field sensor, orientation sensor, gyroscope, and a proximity sensor that is physical. It's not a virtual sensor, and it works perfectly well. In the ecosystem, it should be mentioned that Motorola, it depends too much on Google in many ways, even though it has a good catalog of devices like the Moto Buds or the Moto Watch, and it may even become compatible in some ways with tablets and computers from Lenovo. Actually, many technologies to make the ecosystem work, they're from Google, so it's not perceived as something so exclusive to call it somehow. However, through the Smart Connect app, yes, you could link your cell phone to a laptop of any other brand, which I really like, and it's going to work great. You can share files easily, and you can even have a shared clipboard, use cell phone applications right on the computer, and really very advanced features that we don't usually see on other devices, but in the other technologies. To interact with headphones or with other cell phones, it depends on Google technologies. Also for cloud storage, it depends on Google. And for control of home devices, it depends on Google. The voice assistant is Google's, the App Store is Google's exclusively, so Motorola, as usual, very Google dependent. Let's move on to the application opening test. In this case, the device integrates the Snapdragon 6S Gen 3 processor, 8GB of RAM, and an additional 8GB through virtual RAM, in case you wish to activate it that way. And as you see, it took 4.5 seconds, approximately, to open each application. That is, in this test, it came out a little over a second slower than the Edge 50 Fusion, which I'm telling you, that for me, it would come out as a better choice. Fortunately, as you realize, it seems like the RAM manages it in a good way, but this processor, despite sounding more advanced than the Snapdragon 6 Gen 1, in reality it looks like it won't be more advanced, but even slower. So, the nomenclature of some processors, it can sometimes be misleading. The truth of the case is, it is not such a fast device to open applications, but once they are open, it seems that the device does manage to maintain a relatively smooth experience. Relatively smooth. Note that we do not see reboots in applications. We do not see serious freezes for the price range. I think that if you are going to give you good performance, so the RAM, I think it's perfectly well managed, because with 16 applications that we have open right now, we haven't seen any restarts, and really the performance is going to be remarkably good. In this case, it integrates 256 gigabytes of storage. Motorola does not detail what the version of this storage is, so we'll do a test to more or less, to have a reference of the speed it achieves, which is not bad at all. So in this sense, it maintains an experience similar to the Edge 50 Fusion, although in the writing speed, it seems to fall a little bit short. However, I don't think its numbers disappoint. Consider additionally that there is the addition of 512 gigabytes. Which could be very attractive for those who don't want your cell phone to fill up so quickly, and you can additionally put a micro SD on it. So for the price range, I think the storage may become its strongest point, considering that the Edge 50 Fusion, it doesn't have the capability to put a micro SD card. Let's go now to do our traditional test to export a video, in this case with full HD resolution, with a total duration of 1 minute, joining several clips recorded with this device. And that's it. It took more or less 38 seconds. In this sense, it has behaved well according to what is expected in the range. And for games, Motorola incorporates its own application where it suggests content to you that you can run without the need to download it, so that you do not occupy internal storage. You can also manage the content that you already have installed, and note that you also have more configuration where you can define how you want them to be displayed, the shortcuts that you are going to find at the moment of playing. Also, if you want or do not want that the text labels are shown, and if you want to hide these tools in your screenshots. In fact, it is curious that it allows you to adjust the screen recording, since it also allows you to show the camera while you are recording the screen. You can say if you want it to be in 1080 or in 720p. You can also choose if you want it to go at 60 or 30 frames per second, or even dynamically, and set time or size limits for your files. You can also choose whether you want it to show you a summary of all the functions that it adds when you're playing, and how you want the applications to run that come out as shortcuts. Within the additional tools, you can even avoid some interruptions, blocking notifications and calls. But it also allows you to add some exceptions, so that there are people who can interrupt you. You can also block any kind of additional actions or gestures, both by moving the device, as through gestures, then you have good tools to avoid any unwanted interruption in your game. In fact, it also blocks the automatic brightness, and it enhances the audio when you're playing, so it definitely brings very good options to make you enjoy your gaming experience. And when you open a game, notice that you have a floating button to show these tools that show, among other things, a performance profile for you to choose as a user if you want to give priority to battery saving or to the high performance. Also, the CPU and GPU consumption, in addition to general statistics of the behavior, as the count of frames per second, RAM memory consumption, and processor temperature. It also includes the brightness and sound controls, and the locks I was showing you a moment ago. But one function that I had not told you about, it is that of acoustic lights that will allow you to display on screen a certain flash of lights to indicate where the sound is coming from, if of the left or of the right. This previously highlighted it as a utility for when the devices do not have stereo sound. However, this device, if it has stereo sound. But this feature would allow you to play in silence and still know if any opponent is coming from the left or from the right thanks to the illumination of those lights. You can also go back to the game manager, share the current game, take screenshot or screen recording, and have shortcuts to these applications, which as you see will open in a floating mode so as not to interrupt your game while you are running it. Obviously, if you have the possibility to add here some application that you want to answer some message or something similar. In Call of Duty by default, it gives us the high graphic quality at a high frame rate. In fact, we can also go up to a graphic quality very high while maintaining that rate, or we can go up to a maximum frame rate with high graphic quality. So for this test, we select very high graphic quality and very high frame rate. We enable some special filter, and I want you to see that in this case, the processor has good compatibility with these additional effects that will give more realism to your game. So in this sense, I think it's a good quality processor. It is worth making the clarification that all these contents, we run them with turbo mode enabled. And in this case, the device behaved well. At the beginning, it had a bit of instability, but then I think it improved its performance. It has good graphics compatibility, and as you realize, it also controls its temperature well. So overall, we can say that it is a good device for gaming. In this sense, it has not disappointed at all. Quite the opposite. It seems to be recommended in this price range if one of your priorities is to play in the Legends game. We changed the automatic setting to a medium setting at 60 frames per second, and in this case it tried to go all the way up to 90 frames per second. It succeeded at times, but after a while it went down to 60 frames per second, as you can see in his graph, and once it was there, it maintained very good stability. So overall, we can say that this processor, if maintains a good gaming experience, and again with the temperature well controlled. In the SpongeBob game, by default, it has the resolution and high quality at 60 frames per second. We went down to medium, but notice that it does not appear available. The smoothing effect. Here again, we see good performance. Notice that the average was very close at 60 frames per second, so it really has good stability. It doesn't have too much jitter. Again, it controls its temperature well. This is without screen recording, because you have to make the notation that recording the screen, the performance drops a little bit more. That's why you see that the recording doesn't look as smooth, but as I tell you, in general, it's a device that I think if it's going to give you a good feeling when you are running games. Finally, we played Genshin Impact. In this case, we selected the graphics quality very low. At 60 frames per second, the motion blur was set to low to see what it was capable of, and in this case it went to 30 frames per second. It didn't make it up to 60, so maybe that's what we could ask for in this price range, but it's definitely not a 100% gaming focused device, and it still gives you a good experience in this aspect. Again though, recording the screen, it's not going to give you such a smooth feeling, so it's not as well thought out for recording gameplays. Of course, you could lower the quality of the screen recording to try to improve the experience, but I don't think that's its main point. Fortunately, it does maintain good stability and good temperature control, especially in this type of content, which comes to highlight. In conclusion, this device is not bad. It really attracts a lot of attention. It has very attractive features, but its biggest competition from my point of view will be its sibling, the Motorola Edge 50 Fusion that I've been mentioning to you throughout the video. What elements could set it apart from that competition? The curved screen that could give it a more attractive aesthetic touch, and the fact that it supports micro SD cards. Besides the version of the version of the version of the version of, so if your priority would be the storage or the much sleeker design, it might sound more appealing to you. But on all other features, I would prefer to recommend the Edge 50 Fusion. For the moment, we have come to the end of this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you know you can tell me about it, and I'll see you next time.